Welcome to the Building Your Career podcast. I'm your host, Dom Tarjanskas, and join us as we explore the world of construction. Each episode, we welcome a guest that shares career highlights and career advice, and hopefully inspires the next generation of construction professionals. Welcome to another edition of the Building Your Career podcast. Today, I'm delighted to have on as a guest Jamie Siggers, who is a partner at CampbellReith, who is someone who has been involved in the sustainability agenda for a long time now. So what the aim of this podcast is a lot of you have reached out to say that you want to learn more about the sustainability side of things. So we're going to have a little bit of a deep dive into the sustainability agenda and how that marries up with both the civil engineering side of things and also the structural engineering side of things as well. So Jamie, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you.
No problem. Before we kick on with the questions, could you just give us a little bit of a insight about, your kind of career to date, where you've come from and how that kind of sustainability passion first started out as well?
Yeah, so I was at University at Imperial College. Wanted to be a civil engineer probably, since I was about 12 or 13, largely because my grandfather was a civil engineer, quite a sort of renowned civil engineer within the institution of civil engineers, and had some quite key roles in business. And he introduced me to some of the projects that he'd worked on and took me to the institution, and it just sort of encouraged me and infused me to the point that I decided to get into it. And my dad was an accountant, and that wasn't very interesting at all to me. So engineering was the way that I wanted to go. I was lucky enough to get into Imperial College. I did a 4-year master's degree at Imperial College. Graduated back in 1997, and at the time I was planning to go travelling, take a couple of years out, but just on the off chance, I submitted an inquiry to Bureau Happold, who I think at the time had just been published in the NCE Awards as the SME of the year, quite a small business at the time. And I just inquired, got an interview, and then I was travelling around Europe and got a job while I was in Prague. As it happened.
Good work.
But yeah, I was lucky enough to work on some really great projects at Bureau Happold, and with some really great people, including two that you've spoken to recently, Wendy and Caroline, that were both working above me as my seniors when I joined as a graduate. And I got involved in some really interesting projects, and one in particular, which is the Wheeled and Downland Museum, new grid shell, new sort of visitor and workshop attraction using timber and using timber grid shell, but also using glulam timber for sort of substructure basement and also masonry. And the whole idea was to use, at the time, carbon wasn't really a consideration. It wasn't thought of. It was low energy input materials, but also initially to use labour that was available on site. So the Wheeled and Downland Museum reconstruct existing buildings from around the UK, historical buildings, take them apart and then put them back together in a larger state. And so they've got some skilled carpenters and skilled trades people. So the idea was to build it themselves. And that whole concept of low energy, low sort of building and how to do it really sort of struck a real interest in me. And that also got me involved in timber engineering. And at the time, the Eurocodes were in development, and I was doing quite a lot of design work, trying to see what the difference was between the existing British standards and the Eurocodes, because we felt that we were probably going to straddle the switch over or at some transition point. So I was doing some work, and a colleague of ours was involved with Trada at the time, and he got me involved with a number of the working groups at Trada that were helping to set some of the Eurocodes for the UK national annexes, and also looking at some of the wind load codings and things like that. So I got involved with Trada and timber engineering and did quite a lot of work with them around the Eurocodes and the introduction into the UK, and developed bits of software and spreadsheets for us to design going forwards. And then off the back of that, managed to get involved in a number of other projects that involved timber engineering. So I moved to Dublin and was living in Dublin for a couple of years, working in the Dublin office of Eurocodes and working on another very interesting project with a client who wanted everything to be very, very low energy, renewable materials throughout, low energy, locally resourced as far as possible. And he was a very intelligent client. He was trying to deliver an electronics assembly factory, and he wanted to use timber. And we initially spoke to him about glue lam, and he said, no, I don't want glue lam because it's glue. Once you put the glue in the timber, it's no use for anything else. You can't burn it because it lets off toxic fumes. It's got VOCs in it in the first place. It's quite a toxic material. You can't really do anything with it once it's finished its use. So I want stuff that can be deconstructed, disassembled, and put back into use somehow. And so I developed a three-dimensional truss that used round pole logs. So basically sort of telegraph poles, but untreated telegraph poles, which was very new. There was no codes of practice for it. There was no, there's no kind of, in the UK or Ireland or much of Europe, there wasn't a lot of examples of it. And so there was a lot of research went into it. We developed our own specs. I worked again with Trada in developing connection designs, details, worked with the client because he wanted to assemble as much of it as possible, again with a low skilled workforce on site. And we went to Latvia, sourced the timber. We looked at different ways of drying it to use as little energy as possible, and found out that because of the import laws, we couldn't bring wet timber into the UK, so it had to be thoroughly dried to a very specific percentage. So, and the timber had to go from Latvia to UK to Ireland. So there were three borders to get across and various rules. And so we had to dry it, but it was basically just round pole logs, exactly like telegraph poles. And the trusses were made of 3 cords with a pair of telegraph poles or series of telegraph poles, and then back to back along the sides. And the whole thing was designed to be assembled by him and the low-skilled workforce on site in a tent, dual fixed wires, cables, all sorts of things going into it. And he also introduced me to an extruded clay, dried clay product blockwork, which is quite well used in Europe, but not so much in the UK or Ireland. And we built the factory out of that, with the timber trusses, timber deck, limecrete floors, air tubes for ventilation and extraction, soil separating toilets, and then everything was either runoff water went into reed beds, and the waste was taken by local farmers and distributed over their fields. So it was a very instructive project and an incredible client. You don't get many clients like that. It was an incredible client, and I learned a lot from it, and that really kind of embedded everything about sustainability in my head. Coming back from Ireland, I moved to Whitley Bird and got involved in some really interesting projects there. We're looking at a project that used composite timber and concrete floors, so similar to composite concrete steel, but using the timber beams instead of steel beams, and how the connection work and how that all goes together. A lot of research around that. Unfortunately, that project didn't get built. It was for a new leisure centre. But other projects, a number of small houses and things, looking at very sustainable house builds and things. And then I went from there to WSP, where that experience in timber engineering developed and transformed also into doing a lot of work with existing buildings, particularly the existing historic buildings, existing historic timber buildings and masonry buildings, and doing a lot around those, bringing historic buildings, listed buildings back into use. I did a course study with the Society of Protection of Ancient Buildings and how to maintain and bring back into use existing buildings, but maintain the authenticity or make it very apparent when it was new additions. And it was with them for 7 or 8 years, and joined CampbellReith 8 years ago now, where I am currently running the Bristol office, an equity partner of the business now. And my workload has actually transitioned a lot from structures, which was my background up until joining CampbellReith, to whole site developments. We're now looking at large sites of, anywhere between 5 to 35 hectares to bigger than that, and looking at the whole sustainability of the site. So looking at balancing cut and fill, trying to minimise the amount of materials imported or exported off site, soils on site if they need to be treated on site, building in sustainable drainage solutions, and trying to make the whole development as sustainable as possible.
So I think you touched on a really important point there, and obviously coming from a structural background and then looking at the site as a whole, which in the run up to this, and we had a conversation about, I thought was quite interesting. Could you kind of guide us through, if someone is just looking at a helicopter view of a site and just looking at the wider site, what are the kind of the different options available, or what are the different products available when it comes to the infrastructure side of things then?
Oh, there's so many layers. I mean, it starts off, it doesn't even start, but we're starting looking at the ground conditions in the first place, and we want to have a really good picture of what the ground conditions look like. Mm-hmm. So adequate investigation and adequate quantity of investigation is absolutely key, because you could design an entire site based on 1-2 boreholes, but it's not going to give you an entire picture. It's going to tell you what it is over here, it's going to tell you what it is over here, but really you want to know what the whole site looks like and what the maximum and the minimum and the average is, and build a design and build a solution that suits that. And there are plenty of sites that are now available that are built on landfill materials. We're quite experienced and have got a number of projects building on old landfill materials. And so with those, we need to look at what is in the ground, how contaminated it is, what the landfill was made up from, and develop solutions around it that, as much as possible, keep the material on site and build on top of the material, but obviously protect the homes in the future. And there's all sorts of things that we need to consider: settlement, foundations, loads, settlement under roads and infrastructure, the contamination, all sorts of things that need to be considered. And then once we've kind of established what we're doing with the ground and how we're treating foundations and how we're treating the infrastructure in terms of settlement, that's when we start to look at roads and infrastructure and what levels are appropriate across the site and how to minimize, there are very, very few flat green sites. Most of them are brownfield, most of them are sloping, all of them are difficult to deal with. So it's how we work with the levels to minimize the amount of retaining walls that we might have to put in, how we can deal with natural solutions like embankments and rather than concrete infrastructure like retaining walls, etc. again. And then once we've got those levels established, and I say once we've got, this is a very iterative process, but then it's looking at how the drainage works. How do we get foul water from one place to another place with the correct level of falls, the correct pipe sizes, minimizing any requirements to pump drainage? If your discharge from the site, if your connection to the local sewer system is up here but your site is down here, you might have to pump it uphill. And then with the surface water, again, it's trying to obviously make it run off site somewhere. Sustainability wise, all local authorities have a hierarchy of the preferred solutions of discharging surface water. First and foremost, it would be either into the ground or into like local greens or ditches or things like that. So a sort of not within a contained sewage system. That's kind of the last choice. And we also want to minimize the flow of surface water off site, because what we don't want to do is create issues downstream of our site where we're potentially adding significant levels of quantities of surface runoff that causes a flood downstream. So we have to look at attenuating on site and dealing with increasingly vast quantities of water that are falling on site through climate change, and how we work with that kind of surface water infrastructure is quite key and is becoming even more important in terms of the development of the site. So it used to be fairly siloed. Civil engineering, drainage was all below ground. No one saw it. It connected from houses and it went to and out off site, and then it was in between. There might have been a tank or something like that, but that's it's not very sustainable. Digging a big pit, putting a concrete tank in, There's material has to go off site. There's material has to come on site. There's concrete tanks. There's all sorts of things that go in it, and it's not the most sustainable. It's not the most appropriate. So we at CampbellReith do a lot of work with Syria. And Syria have the Sustainable Urban Drainage Manual and guidance that sets out the 4 pillars of sustainable drainage, which are quantity, quality, biodiversity, and amenity. So the solutions that we're now looking for are treating surface water across all those 4 things. So we're limiting the quantity of water that goes off-site, and that may be through, like I said, last on the list is tanks, but we're basins, ponds, swales, tree pits and things like that, which slow down the runoff of water off-site, give the opportunity for water to go into the ground or to evaporate or to be used by trees and flora and fauna. We're looking at quality. So, rainwater that falls on a road will pick up particulates that come from cars, and then that will go through when, oils and things like that might fall off cars. And so that water becomes contaminated. That we don't want that going into the surface water supply. We don't want it going out to sea and things like that. So ideally, we're treating the water before it leaves our site so that it's clean, as far as possible. It's clean when it leaves site. So that's water quality. And the biodiversity and amenity normally come together as one thing. So under the Environmental Act, all local authorities now are requesting a net biodiversity gain across the sites. So that's a gain in the amount of biodiversity, whether it's flora, fauna, all sorts of things. It's measured across a number of metrics. And when you're starting with a brownfield site with nothing on it but a car park, it's very easy to add to biodiversity. If you're starting with a greenfield site or a site that's been demolished and overrun for years, then you're talking about replacing what's there at the moment and threading it in and around the new infrastructure, new housing, the new developments. And so one place that we can do that is with the surface water. So we can put in swales, we can put in tree pits, we can put in rain gardens, and all of those you can have different types of planting, different types of flora that will sit in that planting, and then that will introduce new species to the site. It will introduce new wildlife to the site, and so increasing that biodiversity is quite easy to do with these pockets of what we're calling green blue infrastructure. So they're dealing with the drainage, they're helping to improve the water quality, they're providing some biodiversity, and they're also providing some amenity for the people that are going to be using and working in that space. It's gardens, it's nice wildlife areas, it's those sorts of things that we're adding. So that's where the whole site starts to come together into one sort of combined solution across us, master planners, landscape architects, the whole lot.
Really like that differentiation between the green and the blue there as well, to be able to incorporate not just whatever's above ground, but also thinking about the water below ground as well, and where that's going to go and how that can aid to the sustainability above ground as well. So I thought that was like a really nice way of describing it there, between the difference between the green and the blue. But I know when we spoke previously, you were involved a lot in the social value side of things as well, taking it one step further from the site. So could you just give us a little bit of an understanding about how you embed that into your projects and what that means on a kind of a day-to-day level?
Yeah, so social value in some form or another is been something that I've kind of concentrated on probably more in the last sort of 16 or so years of my career, where giving back to the community is something that I feel is quite important. I've always tried to give back to the places where I've come from, whether it's the schools or universities, trying to encourage people to get into the industry, because it's it is a really good industry, but it's I feel incredibly fortunate. I came from a privileged background. My dad worked really hard to get us where we were, and I was lucky enough to have a grandfather that was in the industry, so knew the industry, and so I have felt quite privileged. And so doing something is something that I can do. We don't have a lot of spare cash, so I can't just like give loads of money away, but I do have time, and I'm pretty good at managing my time, so I'm able to give my time to other things and to other people and help them out, and use my skill set and my knowledge to help them out. For many years now, I've been involved in the local industry in promoting engineering and working in sort of cross-discipline networking groups to help improve the understanding between the different disciplines that work in our industry, whether it's architects, quantity surveyors, project managers, and things like that. And that comes from an initiative that I was involved in back in 2001, which was called Teamwork. And it was run by the RIBA, and it was about multidisciplinary groups as much as possible working together to develop sites, but using new technology at the time. And most of it was around the new technologies. But the group that I helped put together, what we found worked really well was that we got to know each other really well. And we got to know each other on a social level and a work level, so knew what we wanted. So it was almost second nature to just do what was wanted. So that sort of working together and getting to know people socially, I found as something that was quite key to developing working relationships within projects as well. If you know what they want, if you know what their goal is, if you know what they're after, you know what you're doing and what your part of that is, and you can help them, and then they'll help you. And so I got involved in a networking group in Bristol, the Forum for the Built Environment. Back in 2008, I was living with a flatmate who was a lawyer, and he was going out to young lawyer events, and he took me along to a couple, and I thought, this is great, we should do something like this for construction. So I got involved with the FBE and helped set up the Forum for Tomorrow, which was kind of the young persons group of that, and that was very much about this old idea of bringing people together in a social networking environment. And the adults group had been going for quite a few years, but it's very difficult for a young person to go into that environment where there's people that have known each other for a long time. They're standing around the groups, they're chatting, and these young people coming in, you're like looking at their backs, wondering how to talk to them. So it was about setting up smaller events for young people, more interesting to young people, and all on the same sort of level, so you can socialise and build those networks up. And then that led me doing more in networking in the business anyway, and that led to me getting involved in constructing excellence, and that for me was another string to working with groups to promote best practice around the industry. And I helped, and we set up in Bristol, we set up a number of events throughout the years on particularly promoting sustainability and green build, and alongside Bristol's year as the European Green Capital, and various other initiatives and things like social media, contract law, those sorts of things, just talking about best practice to help everyone engage with it. And then that in turn led me to meeting with a couple of people who had set up an organisation called Bristol Green Doors, which was about promoting the refurbishment of existing houses in Bristol particularly, and how they had been refurbished to high levels of energy and green sort of credentials to bring them up to sort of modern standards. And Bristol's got a lot of old housing. The UK-wide 80% of the housing, well, the statistic back then was 80% of the housing then, which was 2015. 80% of the housing then would still be our housing in 50 years' time. So it's how do we improve the energy? So it was about promoting those people that had taken the initiative to do something to their houses to make them more energy efficient. And as it happens, 6 years before, we bought our house, an old Victorian terrace, and had spent quite a bit of money refurbishing it and bring it up to better energy standards. So replaced the double glazing, insulated the walls, rewired it completely, put in energy efficient radiators and things. The budget wasn't as great as it could have been. So there were a number of things that we did that allowed us to do things later. So we, in the last 2 years, put in solar panels on the roof. Last year we added air source heat pump, so we've got rid of a gas boiler. But our whole point was that we were bringing up the EPC, bringing up the energy performance of the house, and so our house went into that Bristol Green Doors list of houses. And every year we ran an event over a weekend where members of the public come around our houses, have a look around, talk to us about what we've done and how we've done it and the costs that involved and everything that was involved. And we'd had government funding, and so I was involved in seeking government funding. But by that time, I'd also, at WSP, been involved with the management board and the ops board. I'd spent 2 years learning how business worked and how finance worked and ops and team leadership and all those sorts of things. And so I was able to bring this to Bristol Green Doors and share my experience with them and bring the sort of corporate structure to what they were doing. And we were a community interest company, we were a charity, largely voluntary. So it's not, almost totally voluntary. That then in turn got me involved with another organisation in Lawrence Weston, and Lawrence Weston is one of the neighbourhoods on the outskirts of Bristol, close to the M5, close to Avonmouth, one at the time, one of the most deprived areas in the UK. And they had, so a good friend of mine, Helen, had worked with them to bring together this community of people who were interested in improving the outlook for people within the area. And a very, very committed group, great group of people, and this organisation called Ambition Lawrence Weston. And again, I brought to them a bit of my corporate background, a bit of development, understanding of developments, a bit of a network of the people that I've met, that I could bring their skills to bear as well. And I've been working with them now for, since, I don't know, 2011, I think, maybe a bit more. And working with them to look at various different things they can do to improve the area. So we had negotiated with Bristol City Council and other developers and acquired plots of land, and we've built a community centre which is just finishing off now, which is going to be the new local hub. We have a development of 40 houses coming forward. It's community-led design, working with local RPs to deliver it. And they've just improved the whole outlook for the whole area, just massively. And for me, it's massively inspiring to be working with these people and these people that have become really good friends and working in the area. And it's just absolutely fantastic. And it's helped me. I've learned stuff from them. Hopefully I've helped them out. And so that kind of social, is what is now social value. It wasn't social value back then. It was fairly CSR back then. But I get a lot of stuff out of it. And there's a term, if I can remember what it is, there's a term that another friend told me that just completely reflects it. I can never remember what it is. Enlightened self-interest. So it's about helping other people, but getting something back out of it. You know you're going to get something back out of it, and it might be intangible, might be non-describable, but there's something there both ways all the time. And I think that's a pretty good phrase. Yeah, so I've been, I encourage our staff, our team to get involved in initiatives. We don't, engineering isn't the most wealthy, financially rewarded career. I have people that I was at university with who went straight into corporate finance, and they're on what I'm on now on day 2. It's an incredibly rewarding career, and we know a lot and we learn a lot, and there's a lot that we can give back to our communities that we work in. So a lot of the stuff that we do, we try and focus on that a lot when we're working on projects. It's a lot about what will either the emerging community want or the existing community want, and how to improve areas for the whole community.
I like that. And I think it's really good that, I think, you're someone who quite clearly has taken action and actually done something about it above and beyond, just talking about it. It's actually putting those words into action, which I think is fair for everyone, really, is just to be as proactive as possible if it's something that you are really, really passionate about.
Yeah, I think, you can't, if you want your career to develop, you can't sit back and just expect it just because you might be good at engineering, or you might be good at a particular theme of engineering. If you just sit back and expect it to happen, it's not. People don't, that's not how you get rewarded. You get rewarded for putting in some effort. Some of these things fell into my lap and I was lucky. Some of them I actively went out there and looked for, and I would say probably the actively going out and looking for opportunities then resulted in some of the other opportunities falling in my lap. But if you sit back and just expect it to happen, it's probably not. First thing that I did when I joined WSP, when I joined them, the whole idea was, I'd gone from a background of a small business like Bureau Happold and Whitley Bird to go into this big corporate practice, and it was about learning how the corporate world worked. So the first thing I did was stuck my head above the parapet and just said, look, I want to know how the business works. Would you sponsor me to do an MBA? And they said, no, because the last person we sponsored to do an MBA left us within 2 days. And now we're offering the corporate world. But you can get involved with our management board and our ops board and learn how our business works. And, then you can build your career that way. And I spent 2 years doing that. And that gave me so many skills that you don't get just by doing engineering. And that's pushed me in all sorts of directions. And, those skills transferred to Bristol Green Doors, transferred to Ambition Law at Western, allowed me to do what I'm doing now. But so I think it's very much the career is yours. It's not the business you work for. It's not civil engineering. It's your career. Mm-hmm. You have to build it how you want to build it, but you can't expect it to just happen for you.
Yeah. You've got, I think, there's a lot of guests on here who said that the curiosity side of things and being naturally curious and asking questions will get you so far in this industry, because if you have a natural curiosity, you'll always be inputting data and information into your mind that you might not rely on it now. It could be years down the line that bit of information pops out, but it's always that curious mindset that enables you to kind of develop your career, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Never stop learning. I mean, I think that kind of typifies my career a lot. I learned timber engineering, and then I learned about old buildings. Then I learned about corporate world. Then I learned about civil engineering, development around civil engineering. And, I'm always looking at something to learn to add to my ability to give back, basically, in one way or another.
Cool. Well, just to kind of round everything off then, I know I personally was very excited to talk about this, but I know you are very travel conscious as well. But could you talk about your 1975 Beetle, please? Because I know that our listeners would really like to hear that.
Yes, I think this comes from the whole idea started. I don't know, it must have been about 15 years ago, maybe. I mean, I don't like cars. I'll just put it out there. I don't like cars. I think the whole car culture is terrific. I mean, I've never really understood it. But when I was a kid, I did like hot rods. And I got custom car magazines and knew everything about how to do a car up and existing, old car and doing it as a hot rod. But not for the car, not for the engine and the noise, just because I think they look good. And then that kind of went away, and I didn't own a car until we had our little girl, so 15 years ago. So I'd never owned a car, didn't see the need. Always lived pretty much city centre, so walked and travelled everywhere by foot. Was part of the original sort of city car club scheme in Bristol, stuff like that. So just didn't have it until we had a baby, and then it's like, well, you need a car to get places, really. And even that was an old banger. Yeah, about 15 years ago, I'd organised a sustainability event, Constructing Excellence, and managed to get a speaker along with a guy who worked at WSP at the time and did a lot of stuff in sustainability, working with the City of London and things like that, looking at their sustainability targets. And he was talking to us about sustainability. And I was just chatting to him, and he told me that his car was like a 1960s yellow Beetle. That's it. That's his own car. He absolutely loved it. But he said, it's not very fuel efficient and quite polluting, and that's quite a downside. And if he could, he'd like to get it converted. And this was like 15 years ago. It's just not happened. But it was just something that was stuck in my head. And I was looking on YouTube, and something popped up that showed this company in the States that were converting Beetles into electric cars. And I sent him the link and said, look, people are doing it. And then just sort of to enforced about it over quite a period of time. And then I found there's a company in the UK that was starting to do it, based up in Wales. And the car that I had at the time was coming to a point where I just needed to replace it. And I got in touch with the garage up in Wales, a guy called Richard Morgan, and said, what's the deal? And he said, well, first you need a car. It's like, oh yeah, that's a good point. And he helped me source a car. So he gave me sort of what the basics I'd need for their conversion. He told me basically what it was going to cost. And so I went out, found a car eventually, with my daughter's help, and brought it back, an old 1975 Super Beetle, so 1303, slightly larger bonnet than the standard Beetle, and drove it around very fluting for 6 months, and then took it up to Richard, and he converted it to electric vehicle. So had a range of about 150 miles, but it was, I can't remember how many years ago it was, 8 years ago, something like that. But it took about 10 hours to charge up from empty to full. So it wasn't very convenient unless you were doing less than 70 miles each way.
Mm-hmm.
But it was great fun. Absolutely loved it. It was childhood dream of having a Beetle. It was an electric car. It was very efficient. The whole idea was as well, the new electric cars, to get them fixed, you have to go to a garage and they do all sort of tinkering. But this was literally batteries, motor, cables in between, and then a Beetle where you could go to a scrapyard and get a door to replace your existing door. Oh, it's not as easy as that, but yeah, it's more or less. And I love the idea of not, forking out for a new car that uses a lot of materials and has a lot of embedded carbon in it to start with, which you use for 4 years and then swap to the next one. The whole idea of having this car that's been around for as long as I'd been around on the planet, but modernised it. The conversion used old Tesla batteries from vehicles in the US that had crashed or whatever, and batteries had come spare. So it was all sort of second-hand materials. They'd all had a bit of life before. So yeah, I just love the idea. I have to say, you did sell it 6 months ago. So we're now completely carless.
Completely car-free.
Yeah.
That's absolutely fair enough. Well, Jamie, that rounds things off very, very nicely. So just leaves me to conclude everything and say thank you so much for being a guest. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on.
Thank you for inviting me.
No problem.
Joining us on the Building Your Career podcast. We hope you enjoyed hearing from our guest and learning about the different career paths available. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe so we can reach even more listeners. And if anyone wants any free CV advice or simply wants to know the options available to them, don't hesitate to get in touch.